Welcome to the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. I'm your host, Desiree Stanley, here to share some amazing conversations. We're talking business, health, making and saving money, or starting something epic. Think of this as your go-to spot for stories that do a lot more than just kill time. They spark ideas, give you a boost, and perhaps even change the way you look at the world. I'm pulling in the experts, the thinkers, the doers, and the dreamers. We're about to dive into stories that open doors and ideas that light up your brain. Here we go. Welcome, everyone, to the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. I'm your host, Desiree Stanley, and with me today is my guest, Victoria Pelletier. How are you today, Victoria?
I'm fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Yes, and I am so excited for this conversation, and I shared before we began that I am thrilled to have you on the show because you have had such an amazing journey, and I can't wait for the listeners to hear it. You, Victoria, are just this multifaceted powerhouse, award-winning executive leader, a #1 best-selling author. You are in-demand public speaker. You are on board of directors. You are a TEDx alumni speaker. And you, of course, I hope are going to share about that experience with us today. So, Victoria, I always love to have my guests start us off by sharing, how did this journey happen? What led you to where you are today? So take it away.
Thanks, Desiree. I'll try and keep it short because I feel like I could go on forever when talking about kind of the how I got here. So it's interesting. I will say I've pivoted, and as much as I follow what I refer to as strategic intentionality, I've also given myself the grace to kind of go with the flow and intuition sometimes. And that's important in that I started working when I was 11. I have a fairly traumatic sort of childhood and circumstances. My adoptive family were of lower socioeconomic means. No fears about no food or clothing, but there was not much else. And so I started working very young. Around that same time, I was declarative that I wanted to be a lawyer. I think my mom had me watch a little too much LA Law with her back then. So I knew that was a path I wanted to be on. By 14, I was my first leadership role. I'd been promoted to assistant manager of the shoe store I then worked at while I was in high school. And then when I went off to university, fairly young, at 16, I worked in a bank in their contact center. It was incredibly flexible to accommodate my school schedule. And there too, I got promoted almost immediately within less than 6 months into a leadership role. And as I neared the end of my undergraduate degree, thinking about law school, the bank that I worked for relocated me across the country and promoted me. And I thought, let me take 1 year off before going to law school and potentially moving back home because I'd moved cross country for this role. And here's where I followed my gut. I loved the corporate world. I loved the leadership roles that I was in. So I did neither of those things. I never moved back out west, nor did I ever go to law school. And within a number of years, I got recruited into my first executive role at age 24. Massive stretch role for me. I got recruited to be the chief operating officer and general manager for a private BPO, business process outsourcing company, because they had large banking clients and it was primarily contact center, which is what I'd been running for banks. And I've never looked back since. I've stayed in the world of B2B professional services at the executive level ever since, having both built and bought companies along the way as well. And as you mentioned, I've sat on multiple boards. I've been speaking for 20 years, professionally for probably the last 12 or so. And yes, I've written a couple of books. And I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the other parts of me, the multifaceted elements. I'm a wife and I'm a mother, had my kids young. They're 24 and 20, so I'm now an empty nester, a fitness fanatic, foodie and wine lover. There you go.
Oh my gosh, amazing. Thank you, Victoria, for sharing that with us. And yeah, it sounds like really early beginnings of working at kind of what is not typically the starting age for most people. Given the circumstances, it's totally understandable, but wow, what an opportunity that you had, and you just took it and ran with it. And to be put in a position at the age of 24 at that level, many people have never experienced that. And so that's just tremendous and speaks to your work ethic, I think, and just the level that you put into the work that you're doing. So just tremendous. So congratulations for that. That necessity, but also you took it more than that. It wasn't just about the necessity at those later points, it sounds like, right?
Yeah. For me, I remember my mom said to me, probably around the time I was 10 or 11, she said to me, Tori, you need to do better than us. And she meant my parents, as I mentioned earlier, lower socioeconomic means. My dad was a janitor at a school. My mom was a secretary. And so she meant get an education, have a better job than us. But I think as a result of my very early years with my biological mother and then the years with them, I was determined. I wanted to be better than biology or circumstance. So that's a big part of my why. Like that's what's propelled me forward. And my thinking around success has evolved also tremendously. In my 20s, it was about achieving hierarchical success. And with that comes monetary success. And then it was sort of in my late 20s and in my early 30s where I'm like, I've achieved that. It's actually now that's where I got the opportunity to look a little bit more inwardly around things that bring me joy personally and professionally. And also, what do I want to be known for? Who's the type of person I want to become and help others become? And so it shifted quite a bit.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that as well. To understand a little bit more about some of the inspiration and the determination that went into these points in your life. So let's talk a little bit about, and I mentioned about the TEDx, the event that you got to speak at. And so let's talk a little bit more about that experience and what you spoke about specifically on that stage, because that's a little bit more in depth of what we're going to be talking about today. And that's kind of overcoming adversity and obstacles and challenges. So would you share that experience with us?
For sure. So I feel very fortunate to have been invited to be a speaker at TEDx. And the opening speaker, that adds added level of anxiety and stress to set the tone for the rest of the event. And the theme of the entire event that night was resilience, which is something I talk about quite a bit, both at a personal level, but also professionally as we think about how to be resilient as things are constantly changing. My talk was around what I refer to as healthy resilience, in that I do believe that they're innately, and there's studies that show some people are more resilient than others. And so innately for me, I do think there's something in my DNA, but I also believe that it's like a muscle that you can flex and you can build upon. And so for me, I didn't always have this healthy way of being resilient. I've always been able to deal with pretty significant trauma or adversity or challenge, but I didn't always process it. And I think if you don't do that, at some point you burst. And so for me, I've developed steps, I think, to what I refer to as healthy resilience. And so that's what I spoke about at the TEDx. And I hope that it was moving and that I share, personal stories and why I'm qualified to talk about resilience, but also actions that people could take away from that to help them develop their resilience.
Yeah. And I watched that and was quite moved by what you shared and in your story, but also in the sort of steps or tips that people can actually implement and begin working on in their life to, as you say, build that muscle, that resilience muscle. And so would you share with us now some of those ideas, concepts, tips, steps that people can take to begin implementing in their own life to overcome challenges or obstacles that they may be facing?
Yeah. So I have 5 things that I share that I think are critical to developing healthy resilience. And the first is to be really clear on a goal or a vision for yourself. That becomes the anchor in terms of where you want to get to. And we're going to have many of those, whether they be career goals, financial, family, relationships, all those kinds of things. The next is, and this was one for me that actually my adoptive mother was so incredible at trying to teach me, but I didn't listen to her until much later, which is around self-reflection and self-awareness. I think there's a lot of inward work that we need to do to look and understand why we have the feelings or the emotions that we have when these situations arise. Did we put ourselves in situations to create some of the adversity? So really sitting with oneself on those things and looking inwardly. For me, at one point, that was even in a work perspective. I got a nickname as the Iron Maiden because I was all business all the time. I was a very young female executive. I didn't want people to question me, so I showed up in a certain way. And when I heard the nickname that I had as the Iron Maiden, I needed to look at the woman that stared back in front of me in the mirror and go, I knew it wasn't me, but I was clearly showing up in a certain way. So that was some critical looks at myself and deeper understanding. And then the third step is what I refer to as strategic intentionality. I mentioned it earlier. I use the phrase frequently, whether it's around managing your career, managing your brand. But what I mean by that is you do need to be strategic in building a plan, in this case, to get you towards that goal or objective or vision for you that you have for yourself, and then being really intentional. And by that, it's the actions that you take, and not just the actions. It can be the way you think, the language that you use, the behaviors that you exhibit. And then the fourth step is around finding a community around yourself who will support you towards that goal or vision you have for yourself, but also ones that are going to hold you accountable. I think you need people who are also going to identify the blind spots that you haven't yet seen, or the lack of honesty that you might not be having with yourself when you do that self-reflection period. And it can also be professional help, depending on the kind of trauma or adversity that you're dealing with. And then the last in that step, and this one also was a harder one for me, being a bit of a perfectionist, was to give yourself permission to fail. We are going to give yourself some relief when that comes. Have the emotion for sure, but then go back to like step number one, which is being really clear on your vision and goal. So that's the process and the 5 steps that I think certainly I've employed to develop healthy resilience, and I found has worked as I coach and engage and work with other people.
Yeah, fantastic. Great stuff in there, Victoria, for sure. So many good points. First of all, I love having that community and or mentorship, right? So people that you can toss ideas, or they may, like you say, show blind spots that you're not seeing in what you're doing, but also that supportive nature and the bit of accountability as well. I think this is so important. Anytime we're reaching for a goal, striving for a goal, having people who are, okay, you said you were going to do that. Are you doing that? And why not? And so I think that's tremendous. I love that. Also, reflection. I have had a number of guests on the show who have talked about journaling and reflecting and mindset and really examining what we're thinking and why we're doing the things that we're doing and all and how important all of that is. And so again, to reiterate that in the way that you do is fantastic, because I think that the more people hear, somebody's going to get through, right? In the way that you say it, it might strike somebody different. And then they suddenly go, like the light bulb goes off, and then they can absorb the information and take it and run. So great, great stuff.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned your books, and I mentioned them as well. And I would love to have you share with us what those are about. The first one is Influence Unleashed, and it's forging a lasting legacy through personal branding. And so this is fantastic. I love this idea of personal branding. And then the other is Unstoppable: Stories of Change Makers Who Dare to Make a Difference. And again, what a great concept. And so tell us what we would discover in these books.
For sure. So Unstoppable was the first book. I had publishers reach to me to contribute a chapter. So I'm just one chapter in this book. And when they approached me, I thought, oh, this is like serendipity, because I sign most of my social media posts with 2 hashtags. One of them is unstoppable. Nothing will prevent me from achieving like the goal or objective I've set for myself. The other is no excuses, and it connects pretty closely to that. So I knew that this was a perfect one for me. The second one is Influence Unleashed, which is about personal branding. And by the way, I have a third that was just released this week called The Power of Whole Human Leadership, which is around leadership and culture. And I wrote both of these last 2 books around the same time. So I left my last company and I said, while I have some capacity at this point, I'm going to write a book. Couldn't decide between these 2 topics because they're ones that are very deeply personal for me. And so the personal brand one is that I've seen this rise over the last number of years to the importance of individual brands. And very much so, like I'm primarily in the business to business world. And so we're selling to clients at companies, but ultimately I always remember people do business with people that they, and those that they like and they trust, and therefore they want to do business with. So it's not only about building relationships with people, but establishing a strong brand. Quoting from Simon Sinek, people don't buy what you sell, they buy why you do it. And so we need to tell that story. And so I unknowingly started in that first executive role, building a brand. All of a sudden was leading sales and client management teams and responding to proposals and things like that. I was like, oh my gosh. So back then, I don't think we really used that vernacular of personal branding, but that's what I was trying to do for myself and my team, is basically create some differentiation. To the point where when I worked for IBM a number of years ago, LinkedIn had ranked me as the #1, their term, social seller worldwide. And that's a combination of many things. It's certainly your network and how you engage with them, but also the strength of who you are, the content you share. And so IBM asked me to develop content and training for its other executives to build strong brands. And I just started to see that they're like, and not just specific to IBM, like I see many people trying to build a brand around one thing, which is what you do and who you do it for, like the company you do it for. And it referred to by many as your eminence. Well, that is your subject matter expertise or the field in which you work, but that is not who you are as a whole being. And so I broke it down to sort of 4 foundational areas. That first piece around what you do, yes. The next is storytelling. Who are you as a human? Your passions, your interests, your values. And then next, although very related to the last, is what makes you different from others. So why would an employer want to hire you? Why would a customer want to buy from you? What makes you different? And the last is, what do you want to be known for? For example, I've been a part of 40 mergers and acquisitions. One of my nicknames is the turnaround queen. But when I die, that's not what I want them talking about. I want them to talk about who I was as a human. What did I do to make workplaces, community, and the world better when I left it than when I came into it? So all of those 4 pieces. So that's what I wrote in Influence Unleashed with a workbook. So if your audience wants to go, and they can download the free companion workbook that helps you kind of work through crafting your brand identity. And then the other one I wrote, The Power of Whole Human Leadership, is around what I believe is the much better way to lead. And in this, I wrote it because I had huge failures as a leader. Again, the Iron Maiden is not the way I should have been showing up. And so I had to pivot and learn to do things differently. And what I believe, particularly the younger generations, when I stepped into the workforce, there was command and control, and there was a little less of this. But now the workforce wants to be connected to purpose. And I believe it's a leader's job to help them connect the roles they do to the role of the organization, and ideally with their own purpose and values. But it's also being an empathetic leader. Again, the humanity that comes in. We can't park our lives at the doorstep as we walk into the office, remote or physical offices. And so each of the chapters in that book, I share examples, everything from recognizing and seeing the unseen employee and how do we learn more, actively listen. Diversity and inclusion is a very big part of it. So I wrote that. It literally just came out this week. So it's been really exciting.
Yeah, congratulations on that. Fantastic. And such great depth in there. Most people, when you are talking about personal brand, often think of like an influencer or somebody who's just in the social world needs a personal brand. But you just shared how it really plays into a corporate environment, and whether it's to a client that you're working with, a customer you're trying to work with, or within the corporation. You shared about being considered the Iron Maiden, quote unquote. What I think is interesting about that is a lot of times we have this exterior shell, if you will, that is protecting that soft inner part of us because we feel like we need to do that in a corporate environment, right? And so it sounds a little bit like that was just the image you felt you needed to portray to be seen as somebody who is capable and whatnot at such a young age and going forward. And many people, I think, do that. We've got that kind of corporate mask that we put on. And so to hear these things that you're sharing in this way and how it doesn't have to be like that. And you're going to serve your community, your company, whoever you're dealing with in such a better fashion if it's the whole you and not just an image that you're portraying. Right.
Exactly. And yeah, and for me it was a lesson. So part of me writing, in particular, the leadership book was if I could go back to my 20-something-year-old self who stepped into this executive role and started to lead in a very particular way, I would tell myself then, like, it's okay to be vulnerable, to be authentic. And the story I share publicly now around my early years and the trauma I experienced, and subsequently, I sheltered that from everyone, in part because I was probably a bit embarrassed by it. I didn't want people to think less of me. I didn't want them to question sort of my seat at the table, all of these things. But it wasn't until I broke some of that down, I just won the weight, literally and proverbially, like lifted by doing that. But also the relationships changed. So I write the book to like speak openly about the failures that I've made and the lessons I've learned, in the hopes that new or aspiring, even mid-level, it doesn't matter. You can have been a leader for a while. I hope that there's just some nugget in there that will help them be a better leader.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like you're giving permission for other people that you can fail. It's okay. You learn from these lessons and grow and move on from that. And that experience is what makes you even better going forward. Yeah. I want to just say that we are in kind of a unique time in that many people are beginning to reveal very personal things about themselves in an effort to say, you may have experienced something like this or some other thing, and that's okay. Accept it, make it part of who you are and how you deal with people in this world. And you're going to be better for it. But you're absolutely right. I think so many people hide parts of themselves that they're shameful or fearful of other people discovering or whatever. And you're not going to be as effective and as the whole you without embracing that part as well. And so you're giving permission to others to do that. So I think it's tremendous.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. And this world, the Instagram world and Snapchat with lots of filters, it's nice sometimes to take those off and show the real you.
Yeah. And it's not easy. And I know you just shared that you yourself felt like, are they going to look at me differently? Are they going to question my skills and abilities if I share this? And I think a lot of people have those same questions. Is this the right thing to do if I share this information? And that probably goes back to reflection and that internal work and deciding, is this important for others to know or not? And that's a question only you can answer.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to just take a moment, and you shared the 5 really kind of steps or sort of tools that you use to help people get over obstacles or work around challenges. Is there anything else that you want to share in there that to maybe elaborate on in terms of resilience or ways to overcome challenges that people may be facing?
Well, there's one that I would add generally in terms of achieving that goal or objective for yourself, as I talked about, as that being sort of the first step in all of this. I feel that far too many people don't take the leap into something because of usually fear. Actually, one of my favorite quotes is by George Adair, and it says that everything you've ever wanted lives on the other side of fear. And so what I would say is, I think, although resilience, and in the context I'm talking about overcoming obstacles or adversities, but I connect this one almost a little bit more to around that strategic intentionality. You can set a goal or objective for yourself, but sometimes achieving it is scary because you need to do things that are new, unknown, or uncomfortable for you. And I think that zone of discomfort, that's the place where goodness happens. When you put yourself in that place of unknown or discomfort, that's when I think that opportunity arises and growth comes. So I'd add that to the mix there, and maybe as part of that third step around the strategic intentionality and just to, quite frankly, get comfort in the discomfort. And what I will say, particularly in the workforce, I mean, with the rapid pace of change, like things are always like transforming and evolving. So I think we're almost in this like continuous state of that. And so just to change our mindset a little bit to get really much more comfortable with that in the unknown as we move forward.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's like this fluidity that is just the constant kind of changes that we're seeing, and being a little bit more open to that fluidity, right? And being adaptable, and these changes that are happening really rapidly, and we need to be able to move with those changes or we're going to be left behind, right? In my opinion, I think we need to be adaptable. And I want to talk a little bit about the quote that you shared. And one of my favorites is Jim Rohn. And it's really the idea of, I don't have it memorized, so I'm not going to quote it correctly, but basically he's saying that, yes, you're setting a goal, but it's not the achievement of the goal that makes you win. It's the process along the way to achieving that goal. That's where you win, because those changes and things that you're doing, you're getting into a scary place, something that's uncomfortable. You're doing things you've never done before. You're challenging yourself in new ways. And so I think that fits right along with what you're saying. You've got to learn to be comfortable in being uncomfortable, right?
Exactly. 100%.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, this has just been fantastic, Victoria. I love it. And is there anything that you think that the listeners should know that you haven't shared at this point, that you feel like they could just take this and run with it? And you've given us so many great nuggets in your tools, the 5 steps. Is there anything else that you want to share that you haven't maybe so far?
Oof. I feel like I'm generally an open book. I think I've worked so strongly on my brand for so long. In fact, I was being recruited recently to a role, and the CEO of that company, I literally said to him, like, have you Googled me? He's kind of like, tell me your story, talk a little bit. And this is after a couple of interviews already. And then finally I was like, have you Googled me? It's just, so when I'm asked that question around, I sometimes get stumped. But what I will say is, like, I recognize I'm a little bit of an anomaly, certainly from a career perspective and what I've achieved. And I see a little bit more, and I hate to make it super generational, but I have two of these children myself where they're like, and because they got like the participation award, ribbons for everything. And so I also got here. Yes, I have this really awful backstory that pushed me and gave me drive. But beyond that, I do attribute things to an extreme amount of like hard work and effort and performance. And this is a little bit connected to stepping into the things that make you uncomfortable. That first executive role for me was a huge risk. I was a brand new mother. I think my older son was only a few months old at that point. And I was leaving the safety of working in a banking environment that I worked at for a number of years. So taking that risk, but strong performance. And one thing I will say, and particularly as we think about now, I talk about change constantly, the shelf life of skills is rapidly reducing. It's around the 2 years now. I'm not talking about and I actually don't like the phrase, I'll come up with a new one, the soft skills. I'm not talking about the human skills, but I'm talking about the actual functional and technical, and those kinds of skills are changing. So to achieve ongoing level of success, be really clear on how success gets measured and work hard, and do not put so my strategic intentionality is also as it relates to your career. Find yourself amazing coaches and mentors and sponsors, but at the same time, you're the CEO of your career. And so in addition to working hard, having a propensity to continue to learn and getting comfortable with change, is understanding what skills are going to be required for future and how do you continue to make yourself marketable. And with that also is your brand, and it will continue to evolve and change. So there's never a silver bullet. When people ask me, I'm like, it's a multitude of all these different things. And I think you can bring a few of them together to like achieve whatever your own definition of success looks like.
I love what you just said. You're the CEO of your career. That is so great. What fantastic way to think about it, because we are responsible for the trajectory of anything in our life. We are the CEO of our life and our career. And so you've got to be responsible for taking yourself in the direction you want to go. And I had a guest on previously who sat in a position at a company for far, far too long, just waiting for somebody to notice her, all the hard work she had done. And it was like nobody was going to promote her because she was doing such a good job in that position. And she deserved more than that. And so when she recognized and said, I need to take responsibility and I need to move myself into the next position and get noticed. And so it's just right on with what you're saying. You need to be responsible for making those things happen. And again, I think you're 100% right with the skills that we have. I mean, we are all hearing so much about AI and ChatGPT and all these technologies and things that are happening, and recognizing that we have really got to stay, again, flexible, adaptable. We need to continuously be learning new skills and developing talents so that we remain relevant going forward. So I 100% agree with you on that. Good stuff. Thank you, Victoria. Well, before we close out, I always love to ask my guests if there are other books that they have found influential or beneficial, or if there's podcasts that you enjoy listening to that you think the listener should check out. You've shared your books, and I will absolutely include the details for that in the show notes. But are there any others you'd like to suggest?
That's hard to like keep the list short, Desiree, because I'm like an avid, I'll say, listener. I consume almost all my content audibly now. So on the book front, I am a big fan of both Simon Sinek and Adam Grant. And actually, there is a podcast. It's Brene Brown with those two. So you've got those three together. I think it was a 2 or 3 series. And so just all of them talking about, and so of course, Adam Grant is like an industrial psychologist. Simon Sinek speaks on many things and like motivation, and Brene Brown on vulnerability. So you kind of bring all that together. Like, that's pretty awesome. And then because I've been in the B2B world, and so for any of your listeners who are, there's actually 3. So there's one called the Challenger Customer and the Challenger Sale. They're both about understanding the buyers and the motivations of the people that you're engaged with in selling. So again, that's just a great one. And that one that when I originally early on was looking at networking which I think is super important around brand, there's a book called Never Eat Alone by Keith Ferrazzi. Now, he's a bit of a shameless self-promoting consultant, even in his book. Put that aside. He has some really great tactics over how to build a network. And funny enough, my husband now jokes because I am always socializing and networking. So for him, he's like, it's always eat alone. So those are just a few, but again, and Malcolm Gladwell would be another like favorite author of mine, but there's many.
Yes. Okay. Fantastic. Thank you for sharing those. Include the details in the show notes as well. And that podcast episode sounds fabulous. And yes, I agree. Like the three together kind of covering different aspects of the topic. Good stuff. So thank you for sharing that. And the books as well. And Simon Sinek, yeah, fantastic. We'll start with why, right? Yeah. And that should be the basis of everything. Why are you doing this? And for what purpose? And so, yeah, fantastic stuff. Absolutely agree with you there. Well, thank you again, Victoria. And so lastly, I always love to have my guests share. If the listeners want to reach out and just follow your journey, see what else you're doing, I'm going to link the TEDx talk in the show notes, but how else can they find you and learn more about what you're doing?
Well, the one-stop shop, so to speak, is my website, which is victoria-pelletier.com. I won't spell it. I know it'll be in the show notes so they can figure it. But from there, if they want to link out and connect with me on the other social platforms, they can do that.
Okay, fantastic. I will definitely detail all of that as well. And Victoria, again, this has just been fantastic. I have so enjoyed our conversation. I appreciate your time and the knowledge that you have shared with us. These just absolute pieces of goodness that we can implement into our life. I think right away, all of us can take that and run with it. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Desiree.
Yeah, we'll talk more soon.
Thank you, dear listeners, for tuning in to another insightful episode of the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. We appreciate your time and curiosity as we explore fascinating topics together. If you enjoyed today's discussion, be sure to join us next week for another amazing episode. Remember, your journey of learning and growth is a continuous adventure, and we're thrilled to be part of it. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next week, stay curious and keep exploring those pockets of knowledge.